in Shieldon household, over 2 million of them have been locked in this whole time, only just able to go out. Millions of workers are heading back to work, some of which have never actually been able to shield from this virus. Tonight, we are thinking just about that. We're thinking about jobs under threat. We are in one of the most, if not the most, intense workers' rights crisis. And I have three amazing panelists with us tonight to talk about what they think the priorities are, what's going wrong, what some of the difficulties are, but also, and always importantly, at the People's Assembly, we like to talk about how are we getting out of this? What are our campaigning priorities? What should they be? Because we believe fundamentally at the People's Assembly, when people collectivize, when we unite around an issue, and when we have a strategy around winning, that we do shift the government, we can beat the government, we can shift public opinion and win for working class people. I think as well, I don't know if anyone else has been feeling like this, but there can feel like many, many barriers to seeing the type of society that you actually want to see. So all of us here on this call, and probably everybody who is listening to, feels like life and the life of working class people is number one. The survival of the planet, making sure people have good terms and conditions, making sure that children have a future, can breathe fresh air. And we have a political class, because of their dogged ideology, stand very often firmly in the way of us realizing that as a class and as a movement. And we could feel completely despondent. But right now, we have to keep our focus. We have to keep our focus on understanding what we are about to hear are three panelists who are doing every single thing that they can to win in the workplace, to win for fellow working people. And really, whilst we might feel dispirited, we really do have the world to win. And I'm going to repeat this and not be embarrassed about it, but there really are two pressures in the coming period. The pressure of those who wish to force everyone back to work, to replicate a capitalist system which is damaging and degrading to all of us and the planet, to use this as a political opportunity to slash terms, conditions, and pay of working class people. And then there's us, the opposing force, who wish to not go back to normal, to not see the system replicated in the way that has built in so much fragility to this system that we see now. And this government has failed. So as we are coming out of this crisis, we can be very confident to say loud and proud that we have been completely failed by the political class. And it is working people who have all of the solutions to our own problems. I'm going to talk about tomorrow night just really quickly before I introduce our first guest, which is Brian Simpson from Unite the Union. Tomorrow night, we're having a big night in at the People's Assembly because we all want to get together and do something a bit more lighthearted. But the truth be known, the People's Assembly needs money to keep up activism. So this is a fundraising opportunity as well. And there's going to be comedians, poetry. I'm not bringing the jokes. Don't worry about that. I know I'm not funny in the slightest. I'm just like helping smooth things along. There's going to be really funny people that aren't me that are bringing the jokes. Attila the Stockbroker, Jerry Potter, Barbara Nice. I love her. Dane Baptiste, Mark Steele. It's going to be absolutely brilliant. So whether a cup of tea is your tipple or something a bit stronger, settle down at 8 p.m. for the People's Assembly big night in. And please, please, please donate if you can. So Brian organises in the hospitality sector, and I'm just going to hand straight over to you to talk to us about the members in Unite the Union of that sector, what you're seeing and what you see as our priorities as we are coming out of this. Brian, over to you.
Thanks, Laura. As Laura said, Unite Hospitality represents 26,000 bar workers, restaurant workers, cafe workers, hotel workers. And as you can imagine, the last 4 months, because it has been even before lockdown, has been, I dare say, we've been the worst hit sector, if not the longest hit sector, because going back to March, even before lockdown, even before the job retention scheme was introduced, our sector was hit massively because Boris Johnson, in his eternal wisdom, decided to announce 2 weeks before lockdown that encourage punters to stop going to bars, to stop going to restaurants, to stop going out. Now, that wasn't about health and safety. That wasn't about public safety. That was about him relinquishing liability for his friends in big business and big insurance. He saved them billions of pounds in costs because, the job retention scheme wasn't even introduced at that point. He done that because if he had mandated through a lockdown for those hospitality workplaces to close, those employers, those insurance companies would have to have paid out. And that's why he did it. It wasn't about health and safety. So going back to that, like the job retention scheme, it's important to highlight that as a movement, we won that job retention scheme. It was the TUC, it was Unite, it was the Bakers Union, it was the unions at that table that put pressure on the most right-wing government that we have seen in our lifetimes to introduce, to pay the wages of millions of workers across the country, to effectively nationalise huge swathes of the private sector, and then thank the trade union movement for doing it. Like, that's a massive achievement that we need to remember that we brought to bear, pressure that we brought to bear on the most right-wing government. But in the 10 days that preceded the lockdown, we estimate that 300,000 jobs were lost in the hospitality sector in the UK. So our reps across the country, as I say, hundreds of reps across the country got to work really from mid-March, put together collective demands for reinstatement. We had to do all this over Zoom, over WhatsApp groups, various kind of creative ways that, by the way, a lot of our young members had already been using to organise themselves before lockdown. But we managed to get, shall we say, our more technologically confused members to get involved and get involved in that way. And in the preceding 2 weeks after the job retention scheme was introduced, we won thousands of jobs back. Just to give one example, in Glasgow, the G1 group sacked 2,200 people by phone. They got their 60 general managers to sack their staff by phone. They didn't even issue a termination letter. Within 4 days of us launching a campaign, we had 500 people in the collective letter. By the way, we did all this with very little members at the start. We have now quadrupled our membership and our density in this company as a consequence of this. Within 4 days, the company was forced to capitulate and was forced to reinstate 2,200 workers on 80%. We're campaigning for them to get 100%. We're campaigning for them to get their tips. At the Scottish Events Campus, which is the biggest hospitality employer outside or workplace outside the Excel Centre in London, 800 bargaining unit, 800 workers in one hospitality venue, they sacked their staff by Facebook post. They sacked over 600 workers by Facebook post and told them that because they were casual, they were not entitled to notice of termination. Not only did we launch a campaign that forced them to reinstate all of those workers, we have won them 100% of their wages. We forced them to get 20% top up. More than that, we have gotten them, because I should say this is now a hospital, the equivalent of the Nightingale Hospital in Scotland is the Louisa Jordan Hospital, that was a former hospitality venue. And there's about 150 of our members in there who are key workers, who are feeding the NHS heroes and caffeinating them and keeping them fed. We managed to win them not only 100% of wages, we have gotten them between £9.30 an hour and £12.50 an hour. We have put so much pressure on that company that they've been forced to pay the real living wage. They've been forced to increase the wages of these workers so that they're not just reinstated on 80% or 100%, they're actually getting premium payments. At Premier Inn, we launched a campaign which ensured that the workers who were furloughed would get 100% of their wages. That's 40,000 workers that are getting 100% of their wages for the past 3 months. Not only that, for those workers who are working in the 34 NHS Premier Inn hotels, they're getting between 120 and 165% wages. Now, Premier Inn, I'm not even scared about saying this, are not a decent employer. They have not done that out of the goodness of their own heart. They've done it because the collective force of trade unions, not just Unite, have put pressure on one of the most belligerent companies that we've dealt with to pay 165% premium payments to workers who work nights in these hotels. That is a massive win that we're able to celebrate, and we've tripled our membership as a consequence. So like, that is the extent of what we've managed to do just after the job retention scheme was introduced, to force companies to reinstate workers who they had no intention of furloughing. And because this was after the job retention scheme was introduced, they'd already been sacked after the event. So fast forward 3 months, where we are just now, the sector is in absolute turmoil. I've just come off a call this afternoon with members in IHG, Intercontinental Hotels Group, right? The 7th largest hotelier in the world, who made £20 billion in revenue, $20 billion in revenue last year. They are looking to sack between 50 and 70% of their staff, right? I don't know if they heard Boris, not that I agree with this, but the sector is supposed to be opening up on the 4th of July in England and on the 15th of July in Scotland. Why are they making 50 to 70% job losses? It's because they want to bring these people back on 0 hours contracts. They want to make them so desperate that they, people who are on maybe £9.50 an hour, that they'll come back and they'll work on £8.70 an hour, 0 hours contracts, and it's all about cutting costs. These companies, billionaire companies, can afford to absorb these costs, all while the job retention scheme is still paying the wages until October. All they're going to be asked to contribute is 18% in national insurance and pensions contributions. Disgraceful. I've just come off a call with our members at the Grand Central Hotel in Glasgow, flagship hotel, five-star hotel. Out of 260 workers, they are sacking 245 of them. They're only keeping the heads of department so that they can keep it ticking over until October, until occupancy comes back up to 50%. And then they're going to bring these workers back who are so desperate that they come back. But do you know what? They're not taking that. They're not accepting that. 80 people on that call today, that's a third of the entire hotel, are now in Unite. We are close to getting recognition in a hotel that we've never been able to get that. So yes, it's bad. Yes, we're going to see tens of thousands of job losses, but I honestly believe this will galvanise the hospitality industry and the workers who have been shafted for so long to actually get involved in a union, collectivise and realise their collective power.
Thank you so much, Brian. And we do say it quite often, but the very best thing that any of us can do to protect ourselves in this crisis and when we weren't in the crisis is to be in a trade union. But what is wrong with these people? Sacking people by text, sacking people by Facebook, it's just an utter disgrace, not least because people are grappling with how they're going to deal with the virus, relatives, loved ones that they might be trying to protect, just the mental drain on how we get out of this. But it just is symptomatic, is it not, of the legislative environment that they exist within, that there is a confidence actually to treat workers like that. And the only barrier between unfettered exploitation and the exploitation that we often see now is the trade union movement, is those organisers, those reps, those conveners, those officers employed by unions who are there making the case day in, day out, and reminding people, and I think this is sometimes half the battle, reminding people that you don't have to put up with that. There are international obligations that the government has to fulfil in relation to trade union rights and freedoms and individual rights of workers, but still, without the trade union movement there and those reps in the workplace, there is a confidence to flout lots of those laws. I'm going to move to a different kind of world of work now. We have Jesse Boxall-Steeden with us, and he is a critical care nurse. Now, just first of all, Jesse, before we give the floor to you, let's just say from People's Assembly, thanks so much for taking time out on a day where you are probably trying to rest and recover from what is a really difficult environment. So we're just kind of extending the hand of solidarity and thanks to you before you speak. So over to you, Jesse.
Thank you very much for that. So I qualified as a critical care nurse in September in 2019, and I'm going to be sort of looking from the perspective of student nurses now and the ones who are due to qualify in the next sort of 3 to 4 months. And the reason for that being is that I was lucky that when I applied to be a nurse in 2016, throughout my degree, I was awarded the bursary, and that was the last year that the bursary was awarded. And without it, I don't think I would have been able to get to where I am now. We had student loans, support from family, the bursary, and as well as working on the side, and sort of just about able to manage month to month. And the students that are now currently studying, they're going to end up leaving with 45k in debt for the privilege of working, of supporting and helping others, which for a profession that for a starting salary that's under 25k does feel like a bit of a kick in the teeth when you look at the national average wage. Students were very gracefully asked to opt in and basically support their country, support the NHS amidst the pandemic on a 6-month contract from the government. After 2 months, the pandemic was told that, okay, you've done the hard work now, we don't need you, you can step back into your roles. A lot of the student nurses actually gave up full-time or part-time employment to support their studies. So they've given up jobs that they could have gone into when they qualified to help out on the front line during the pandemic. And as a result of that, they're now having their contracts terminated. So they're now only being paid the 2 months that they have already worked, whilst the remaining 4 months until they still get their registration and their PIN, they have to find other work, which isn't impossible. But I found that during the pandemic itself, although it is still ongoing, I will voice that very clearly, we are still in the pandemic. We should still be very careful and very vigilant when we're out and about. And I feel like the lockdown measures are putting people at risk. They're valuing your money more than they are your life, and people still need to be very careful, very cautious out in public, and stay alert. You need to look out for yourselves. You need to make sure you're social distancing, and despite all the lockdown regulations being eased seemingly to nothing at this point, please look out for yourselves. But I digress. So these students are now possibly without work for 4 months, whilst although in the pandemic we needed everybody that we could. As it's now easing a little bit more in the hospitals, it's still rife, but they don't need as many support staff. Those support staff now don't have the bank hours that they may have been previously able to pick up, because the full-time workers are returning. People have been redeployed, and everything's starting to resume a little bit back to normality until a potential second wave hits. At the moment, there's 43,000 unfilled nursing vacancies within the NHS, and following the bursaries stopping in following the bursaries stopping for the 2017 intake, there's 13,000 less nursing applicants. So, you do the math, potentially with people that have also retired due to, as COVID was happening, some people came forward from retirement to come back to work for the front line. Other people decided, now's my time to get out while I can, and they retired early. I don't blame them at all. However, obviously that means a potential larger shortfall of NHS jobs that are going. This, unfortunately, means that we're then working to potentially fill sort of 60,000 jobs nearly, and we're still getting underpaid, we're still not getting supported, and those student nurses that are paying paying £29,000 a year for over the 3 years for their degree are actually getting yet less university time than I was, even though I was paying nothing. So you put that into perspective, they're paying £9,000 a year to have to basically work more from the library, more from home, and get less contact time with those universities. And that was a move that the government tactically made. You're charging them more and giving them less. And as a result, I don't know what sort of fantastic people that are working on the front line, but I don't know what difference in education they might get to the one that I received and my predecessors. Nurses have not received an adequate pay rise in the last decade. The government boasted a 1.7% pay rise this year. However, in line with inflation, it's actually fallen by 7.4% in real terms. And then they're still saying, give us a clap on a Thursday night. Claps don't pay bills. We need to be properly supported. We need to be properly funded. And it's not just the NHS that this needs to happen to, but it needs to happen nationally with all sectors. And unfortunately, the huge number of cuts that have been happening and the vilification of the public sectors, unions, for example, you can't vilify a union for wanting to stand up for the rights of workers when they're standing up for what should be theirs. They're standing up for their rights. They're not asking for too much. They're asking for what they deserve. And unfortunately, the government has always been very good at vilifying and putting it on its head, so that they look like the good guys. Oh, we gave you that 1% pay rise. Yes, but that's 1% in a decade. In real terms, we should be paid nearly 7.5%. And why should we? Unfortunately, due to these pay losses, it's pushing more qualified nurses and qualified professionals to work in the private sector. And again, I don't blame them. If they're being offered a little bit more money to do so, it's for them. It's for their best efforts. If they're not going to get paid the wage that they should be paid to work for the NHS, why wouldn't they look elsewhere? But as a result of that, it's putting more financial burden onto the NHS and the services that it should be providing. The funding is being cut. The services are being reduced year after year after year, and we're being pushed to breaking point more so than we already have been. And as a result, it's making privatisation for the NHS much easier, and it's happening under our noses. Oh, you didn't fulfil this contract because you didn't staff us and give us enough quality or provisions and staff to enable that sector to provide that service to happen. Therefore, it then gets sold to Richard Branson, whoever else within private healthcare industries, and you're paying for it. The taxpayers in the UK are paying more money to get less of a service. And then, with this deal that's possibly going to happen or have already happened with the US, how is that going to fare? We pay £8 something for a prescription in the UK, and we're very lucky for that, considering the medications can cost in some cases up to hundreds or a few £100s a pop. With the US, I was in the US a few years ago and on an exchange trip, and it was very interesting and very eye-opening. With their insurance system, you might pay $100 a month, except your insulin bill, if you're diabetic, might be $999 to pay. If your deductible is $1,000, which is the excess in your car insurance, for example, you still have to pay that $999. So you're still out of pocket despite having that insurance to cover you. I dread to think how that would happen in the UK, where we've become so comfortable with the National Health Service, and quite rightly so, because we pay for it and we deserve it and it's our right. One of the fears as well that I'd like to go into a little bit later would be the lack of PPE and the stresses that caused amidst the pandemic. Luckily, I was very fortunate to work in critical care. We were given sort of the first level of provisions, but it was very much day by day, week by week. This is only going to last us a few more days. Can we cut people going into the hot zones to make sure that the PPE will last us a few extra days until we get another delivery? And it was very much living hand to mouth. And you think, for a first world country, amidst a pandemic, which we knew was happening months before it did, and we were given opportunities from the EU and other worldly nations to prepare for this, as well as having a report, an exercise that happened in 2016, which predicted everything that we would need: more critical care beds, more ventilators, more PPE, and more social care beds. And yet this didn't happen. And that report was pushed under the rug. And I just think it's absolutely ridiculous. And we need to address this, and we need to stand together to fight this inhumane
Oh, Jessie, honestly, thank you so much. I'm sat there listening to you, thinking like, I want to get out there and protest now, because it feels like everything that you just set out there. The People's Assembly, by the way, aren't calling physical demonstrations yet, and because of the safety concerns. But everything you set out there, you're talking about £45,000 worth of debt, right? And it's not as if these people are asking to go on luxury holidays after their training, or they're actually being trained to preserve life, to keep us well, to keep us safe. And the idea that they would be in debt to a system is despicable. And then all of the things that you said about, whilst people might be able to find a job in that break, those student nurses, I think it's going to be hard with, as Brian talked about, some of the kind of potential sector collapse in different places. But why should they? They've just come to deliver a service when they didn't have to keep us well, to keep us safe from this virus, to nurse us through this virus, and then to leave people in limbo for that period of time is absolutely shocking. And I think herein lies my frustration, and I'm sure it does yours too, that we see the scale of all these huge problems, and it feels like the pace of change is too slow. It feels like the kind of awakening of our whole movement needs to be more radical. Let's be honest, it needs to be more assertive and more confident. And I am hoping, as people hear you, Jessie, hear you, Brian, and are about to hear Melissa, that they hear your words and are awakened to the litany of government failures. Because as you went on to talk about the failures in PPE, I honestly know I could not do your job, Jessie. And the idea, I know that for a fact, loads of people, it takes a special kind of set of skills skills, doesn't it? And the idea that you'd be sent into those circumstances without the correct materials from the state to keep you safe, again, is utterly heartbreaking and a motivator for us all. Before Melissa speaks, I want to ask you to do this. It takes 2 seconds, but vastly increases the amount of people that hear and see our speakers. Even if you share now, and all you have to do is click on the little share button by the side of this live, people might come to Facebook in an hour's time after they finish putting children to bed or whatever. They'll be able to hear Brian, Jessie, and Melissa. So please, please, please share. It's all we ask of you, obviously, other than tuning in every single week. Melissa Evans is a Bakers Union member and activist, and I saw you speak on a clip, Melissa, and was like blown away. So no pressure, but I'm really looking forward to hearing what you've got to say tonight. Over to you, Melissa.
Hey, thank you, Holly. I'm Melissa. I work at McDonald's. I'm a mum. I work at McDonald's in Wandsworth Town, South London. I've worked there for nearly 4 years. I really, really enjoy my job, and I enjoy being with my colleagues. But the work is very stressful and it's very hard. The work is really, really hard. And yet we get no respect and we get no appreciation. And through all our hard work, we don't get the respect that we deserve. And the pay that we get is not enough to live on. It keeps me in poverty. I'm a mum and poverty is inherited, and I live paycheck to paycheck and I struggle to get by. I have to rely on the state for help. And is it right that I have to rely on the state when I work for one of the richest companies on the planet? You know, I can only get what I need, and when I want something extra, like my headphones, I have to go broke to pay for it. When I heard we was going to be furloughed, I was shocked and I was worried because I didn't think it would ever happen. I thought that McDonald's would stay open even if a bomb was dropped, and the shock quickly turned to frustration because, like you guys said before, there was no communication. There was a lack of communication. They didn't even have the respect to tell us what was going on. Times are really, really hard right now, and I feel confused by it all. I am adjusting as well as I can because we have to, but 80% of my wage is not enough. 80% of my wage causes me and my family to suffer. My family are coping well too. Like I said, we have to. We all miss each other, and I miss my friends, I miss my workmates, and I miss just going outside. Despite all of this, we are all survivors. Me and my son are coping. I have a lot more time with him now, which is amazing because before, work often meant that I never felt like I had enough time for him. So the extra time I have with him now it's precious. I joined the union because I was fed up. I was fed up with never having enough. I want to be able to buy something and not be broke, and I want to be able to buy something and not feel guilty. I shouldn't have to choose between the basics, like putting gas in my home to heat my house and food in my fridge to feed my son. I should be paid enough so we can live a decent life, and I should be able to buy what I need, and I should be treated with respect. Fighting back means that I'm taking control of my life. It means that I'm showing my son that there's much more to life than what we've got. And it means that I've realized that none of this is my fault. It's the system's fault. The system is broken. McDonald's can afford to pay us more. We're not talking about a small business here. We're talking about a rich business that gives their shareholders millions while we get by on as little as they can get away with. I'm struggling without a living wage. That's why I'm fighting for £15 in a union. I'm fighting for all fast food workers. I'm fighting for all workers. In fact, we can have the dignity. We can have the dignity and respect that we deserve. That's why we need a union. That's why it's so important. And I'll tell you another reason why we need a union is to keep us safe. We're starting to go back to work, and I'm scared. I'm scared for myself. I'm scared for my family. You cannot socially distance in a fast food kitchen. I say this to all politicians on all sides. No, 1 meter is not enough to keep us safe. 1 meter means social distancing is effectively over. We can't get to work without getting on packed tubes and busy buses. Are you telling me people are not going to get ill and die in fast food? They are. Only last week, a KFC worker unable to live on statutory sick pay, £95 a week, collapsed with COVID. I mean, it makes me so angry to know that that's actually happened, and that we've been talking about it and we've been saying it for so long, and it's been ignored. Like transport workers have died, like meatpacking workers have died, like care workers have died. If we're working close together, we will transmit the virus and people will die. That's why we need a union. We need to strengthen ourselves by organizing our workmates, by getting our friends and our families involved. We win by sticking together. We win by taking action together. Nothing changes unless we take action together. We cannot depend on big corporations to keep us safe. And we can't depend on the politicians to keep us safe. We must take action together. Postal workers, fast food workers, teachers, firefighters, everyone, all of us together, with our families, with our friends, our communities, all of us together, we can win together. We can all stay safe together. Let's ask them to join us. Like we either sit down and do nothing, and all this struggle and the hard times, they continue. More people get sick and die. Or we get together and we stand up and we make a change. We make change happen. We have to stop this government and these corporations from literally killing us. We have to do that together. I've been inspired by Black Lives Matter. People coming together to say what we've been trying to say for so long. The unity has inspired me to take more action. I've been inspired that we're making change in such a short space of time. I've been inspired to show more solidarity. I've been inspired to do more to lift my fellow BAME workers up. The fact that Black workers are disproportionately affected by COVID shows just how deeply seated this issue really is. We are always on the front lines in jobs where public are a massive part of our work. And we do this whilst living with racism every day. The racist statues falling, it's a good thing. People talking about racism is also a good thing. People talking about the real British history of colonialism and slavery is a good thing. But nothing really changes by just bringing down a statue. Things change when we challenge the root causes of oppression, of our oppression. When we challenge the corporations that exploit us and pay us poverty pay, when we challenge a structure that is designed to hold us down and to keep us in our place, if we are gonna seriously change things, the only way we can do that is by building power, and it's by organizing. In my union, we say a union is workers coming together to use our strength in numbers to get things changed that we can't change alone. That's how we win. That's why I'm very proud to be here representing the Bakers, Food and Allied Workers Union, Max Strike BAME committee. We formed this committee inspired by Black Lives Matter to take action. We wanted to create a space where BAME people could come together, where we could discuss our experiences, where we could develop our arguments as BAME fast food workers, where we could discuss how we win our white co-workers to the cause, where we could empower ourselves and each other to take action. We have created a wonderful supportive space, energizing committee, where we're building each other's confidence up, and we're sending speakers out into the movement to tell our story. We're researching and learning, and we're making ourselves strong, because we know that if we are really going to have changed, or we're really going to challenge this racism, we're going to have some big enemies in our way. People who benefit from racism, like politicians who use racism to make themselves popular, like the corporations that we work for, corporations that tell us that they are on our side and we are with us. If you're with us, recognize our unions. If you're with us, pay us a living wage. If you're really with us, then give us the stability to take care of our families and to live securely. If you're either with us or you're not. There is no middle ground. Don't use our struggle for racial justice as a marketing opportunity. It's easy to say that you're with us when racial justice means a tweet or an endorsement from a Black celebrity. But when racial justice means economic justice, you're out. When racial justice means material improvements to our lives, you're out. You won't give us a union. You won't give us living wage. You won't give us stability in our lives. Your actions are they're not good enough. It doesn't wash. We see you, we don't believe you. Black lives matter. Black lives quality of latter lives. Black quality of life matters too. Thank you.
Oh, Melissa. If anybody asks me, like, why should you be in a trade union, I'm just clipping that, right? And I'm just going, just watch it. Just watch what Melissa's got to say.
It's so important. It's so important. I tell everybody, join a union, join the sector that you are in, find it and join it as soon as possible.
But like, your explanation there too of like the performative nature of like the kind of big corporations kind of trying to perform allyship really with Black Lives Matter campaign, but yet still perpetuate the conditions that mean working class Black people don't have a good quality of life. You're fighting for £15 an hour, for goodness sake, in one of the biggest corporations. Is it not the biggest corporation in the world?
I think it's like the second biggest. I'm not 100% sure on that one. I think it's the second biggest, but regardless, they make super amounts of money. Super amounts of money, and all of us are literally living below the breadline, and we're struggling, and it's unfair.
And you know what? My first job was at McDonald's, Melissa, and like, but I was 15, so I didn't have like loads of overheads, but I do know it was really hard. Like, it is such a hard job. Like, it is so pressurized. Like, there are so many demands. Like, and you're right. Like, the abuse and the kind of degradation you get from customers sometimes. But basically, you've just taken down the system there. And seriously, if you are working in McDonald's and you are not in a union, please join the union for every single reason that Melissa just said there. And she said our lives are not expendable. And this is a really important point that I want to kind of springboard now into the questions, and they've been coming in. So many people in praise of all three speakers tonight. But being part of a trade union isn't just about individual protections if something goes wrong. As Melissa said so eloquently, it's about building that power to win things through collective action, knowing that as individuals we don't hold the power. There are no individual solutions to any of our problems as working class people, and that's why being part of that collective is so important. Now, if we go for back to the really practical, I just want your take on this. So if everyone could take themselves off mute and just kind of chip in where possible. Somebody asked at the very beginning of the show, Jody said, what do we think of the 1 meter rule? It seems as if we're now having, I know you touched on this, Melissa, but it seems as if we're having to accommodate these rules, even that we were fighting against at the very beginning of the lockdown. Jessie, I don't know if you want to come in first on this. You're a experienced NHS worker, so what's your take on this?
To put it shortly, I think the 1 meter rule is absolute crap. It's not going to protect you. The government guidelines has been very, very vague, and the reason for that is, like Brian said, because they don't have to take liability for it. If they give poor guidelines and put the ownership onto the individual or onto the businesses, then they don't have to take ownership for the huge volumes of people that have been affected by COVID and unfortunately died from COVID. The virus isn't going to look at you and go, oh, they're 1 meter apart, it will be fine. No, it's still having the same symptoms and it's still having the same means of spreading as it did at the very beginning. It just means that they're trying to ease you back. If they say 1 meter, you can go back to work. It doesn't make the virus any less effective against potentially taking your life. It's absolute rubbish.
And Brian, are you in the same?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a medical expert, but I have read the Lancet report that was produced 2 weeks ago, I think, which basically decimated the argument around 1 meter. The government seems to be relying on two groups. One is the business lobbyists who are saying that they can't function. Because I've got to say that the 2 metre rule is controversial within the hospitality industry. There's a lot of small restaurants that just cannot open, cannot function with 2 metres. So we've had to have a debate, and I've had to listen to our members about that, because there's some people that say, well, we are going to lose jobs if we don't reduce it to 1. But our response as a union, as a movement, needs to be, well, I'm sorry, health and safety has to come even before jobs. If situations like Melissa described in KFC, where people are almost dying in the workplace because they're not adhering to those medical guidelines, then I'm sorry, that has to come first. Our number one aim, if nothing else, as a movement, has got to be to protect the health and safety of workers.
Melissa?
Yeah, I completely agree with what the other two just said. To me, 1 metre rule, it means social distancing is effectively over. You might as well tell people, just go back to your normal day-to-day lives.
So you said in your contribution that it is practically impossible in the fast food world. Why is that? Is that because of like the mode of production, passing things from one person? What did you mean?
Yeah, it's that the kitchen's so small as well. It's the fast pace of everything. Like, we literally work over each other. Work over each other. The amount of times you bump into somebody in a day is phenomenal. You know, you have to get over it, kind of thing. It's a lot. I just can't, unless there was some serious modifications to the kitchen. I couldn't see it working. It just doesn't. Not over a long term. Maybe at first it might work because we're vigilant and whatnot. But once you get settled back into work and you start back into your normal routine, it's just gonna go out the window, you know.
And I think that you know, you could be lulled into this false sense of security, couldn't you? I just wanted to say this because lots of emphasis and judgment has been put on like individual behaviours. So you see loads of pictures of people on beaches or like going shops, queuing outside of Primark. You'd have seen that imagery. And in my view, but I don't know what your take on this is, it's kind of futile, that kind of judgmental stance. Our energy has to be at the ambiguity, and Jessie talked about this too, the ambiguity, almost the deliberate ambiguity. Things are getting better, go out and shop, go, you know, join a family. I'm so confused about what the rules are, and I'm looking into them. If you're having to get on with your daily lives and you're stressed about family and no childcare, this is incredibly confusing situation. So it really is like it's deliberate. Jessie, I don't know if you agree, and I know Brian, you talked about relinquishing responsibility, but it hasn't been clear. Have we ever really had a full lockdown?
When you look at how other countries, sorry, I'm just going to chime in very quickly. When you look at how other countries, when they locked down for a start, and to the extent that they did lock down, it was very much sooner and it was much more efficient than ours was. And they were actually policing it. I've got friends that currently live in Spain and in France, and they were saying that the police were actually going around, and if there was people out and about, they were stopping them. At a distance, they were stopping them. The police in these countries were given PPE, and they were stopping people to say, why are you out? If you were going shopping, you had to have a list and basically a letter to say that you're supposed to be going out. And if you went into a shop without a list, they wouldn't let you in. It had to be clear as day what you were doing and why you were there. And if it wasn't, if they couldn't say you're in for a good reason, they would send you back home and they'll possibly fine you. In the UK, unfortunately, we didn't do that. And even as we went into the lockdown and as we're easing out of it, the guidance has been so vague and so unclear, and no one really knew. And I think the fact that they then didn't penalise Dominic Cummings for breaking the rules of lockdown, but then they're still willing to arrest minorities for breaking lockdown. And actually, you know, there needs to be some consistency, and they need to be holding their own to account. Otherwise, why would people follow the lockdown rules if they know that they're not going to be held responsible for it, and they believe that it's crap because they're not? You know, there's no reason to enforce it. There's no reason for them to abide by these rules if they aren't aware of the huge risks that they could be undertaking, putting themselves and other people at risk by going outside or going to the shops and going out back to work if it's premature.
This government,
sorry,
I was just going to say, Laura, this government has royally screwed up. 60,000 people have died, right? It is the worst proportionate death toll, worse than America, worse than Trump, right? And they have to pass the buck to someone. So the best way to do that is to atomize it, is to individualize it. And that goes for, attacking working class people as much as it does, the middle class parents who refuse to, they'll go on day trips out to the beach when we're in full lockdown. The sheer hypocrisy, as Jessie says, that's highlighted by, a senior official within the government getting away with that, and yet, and not being asked to resign. It's just, it shows you the sheer hypocrisy and lack of duty of care that the government has over anyone's lives, to be quite honest.
And lack of respect for the general public and just us in general. The lack of respect.
Because they did royally mess it up at the beginning of this process. There was no kind of, as Jessie said, like some of our lockdown measures were what other nations were doing in their easing period, and so they did mess it up at the beginning, and now there is a huge kind of economic price, some sector collapse, huge worries about what comes next. I just want us to kind of remind ourselves, and like, while I've got you three here who are excellent at explaining things, I would like you to try and explain this, because Jack has asked the question saying, how do NHS workers get a well-deserved real terms pay rise, right? But so I'm going to come to Jessie first, but I do want you to think about other sectors too. And please try and explain this. I'm not being patronizing to anyone listening, but there will be young people listening who don't understand about collective action, who don't understand about being part of a trade union. So please try and explain it to that person who knows things are awful, who knows things can be different, but haven't connected the awfulness to how we actually enact that change. Jessie, how do you get a real term pay rise for NHS workers?
So when looking at the inflation rate and the cost of living, it seems to be going up every year. If you look at the cost of a house, for example, what it was in the 90s to what it is now, that's kind of what you're aiming for. Look at it, think of the price of a loaf of bread. If it costs £1, it continues to rise, your rate of pay should be continuing to rise so that you can afford those same necessities. If, for example, family member of mine bought a house in 98, I believe it was, for £73,000. That house is worth, I think, just shy of 600,000. If you're thinking of that in the rate of inflation, that's crazy. And granted, that is in Brighton, which has gone up exponentially. So Brighton is 50% higher than the national average. So that's not the national average. That is 50% higher than. However, if you look at that as a potential, the rate of wages hasn't improved by that much. If you think of it, in the last 10 years, we've received, the NHS workers and nurses have received a 1.7% pay rise in 10 years. However, if you look at that in line with inflation, so every year pay is staying the same, the cost of living is going up. Every year going up and chasing our tails. They've given us that 1.7%. However, we actually should have had another 7.4% to be in line with the national average. And that's, as a healthcare professional, that's not counting people like Melissa who work in an industry where they're not paying their staff an adequate wage. They're basically just about paying the minimum wage, or if not a little bit more, just to get by. If those companies can just skim and pay as little as possible, they will. And that's why this country is in such a huge deficit between people living on the breadline and the people that are ultra rich, is because they're taking money from everybody else's pot to fill their own. And actually there should be more of an equality blanket. Everybody should be given a little bit more to make sure they're all living a better quality of life. And in doing so, it will ease the strain on the NHS and actually make sure that our NHS, our National Health Service, will be better supported, better funded, with less need and less demand put upon it.
Absolutely.
Excellent explanation. So how do we actually enact that? Jessie's just really eloquently explained what the problem is. How does trade unionism, what you do, Brian and Melissa, how does it take us a step closer to realising that one demand, and there's going to be loads as we come out of this crisis? Brian?
I suppose the easiest way to describe it, and I don't think it's patronising, because it's the distillation of what a union is, which is, as a collective, coming together with your colleagues, with your friends, and putting forward your demands for what you perceive to be a fair wage, for what you perceive to be a secure contract, a sexual harassment policy, not paying for transport home after 2 a.m. when you're forced to work in a bar to that time at night. These are that is very reasonable demands to make as a collective, as an individual versus a corporation, let alone if you were just against an SME or like, you know, your friend who owned a cafe. As Melissa says, we're against some of the biggest corporations that society has ever known. You know, trillion dollar companies that will never, ever do the right thing morally or legally until they're forced to. And that's what trade unions are all about. You know, I love going on strike like the next person, but it's not all about strikes. It's about simple demands, as Melissa's putting forward. It's about reasonable demands for a wage that you can live on. As I said, at 4 o'clock, we were on a call with our members in that hotel. I've struggled in the past to organise this hotel. Now that they're being faced with redundancy and losing their job, they're finally realising their collective power and their right and their almost collective demand for better. And that, for me, is going to be a lightning rod for this movement, because if you're forced into a corner and you finally realise your collective capacity to actually transform the workplace, that's only a good thing. And that's what we're seeing across the hospitality sector. We've put on more members in the last 3 months than we did in 2019 combined. So something's happening. People are realising their collective power. It's not just COVID. COVID has magnified everything, but it's actually people realising that they need to do something about it with their colleagues.
And Melissa, like you were nodding along to that, but what do you see the journey being between where we're at now and realising that collective strength? What are the steps? What's your advice, really?
Basically talk to people, talk to your colleagues and find out their issues and see what problems they've got at work. See if it's the same, see if it's different, because everybody has, you know, different works have different dynamics, and every person has different issues or, you know, problems in their lives or whatever it is. Like, talking to each other and actually being there for each other. It's collective. Like, it's the collective that works. It's doing things together, and it's doing things together. And, you know, this and actually being a democracy and not just having just one person is the leader. No, we are all in this together. And the sooner we realize that we're all in this together, the better. Because once we start to put in all our ideas, it's not just one person is never going to solve all the problems of the world. You know, every person is living on this planet, so every person has to put into that way the world ends up. It can't be just left in the hands of a few. It has to be us all together. The sooner we get together, talk to your colleagues, talk to your friends, talk to your family, sign all the petitions you can, you know, get out there and, well, not get out there and speak to people, but, you know, whenever you can. Talk to people about joining the union. In fact, join the union yourself. It is the one most important thing I can tell everybody to do, is to join a union. It's the most important thing, and especially right now, to make sure that we get the rights that we already have and the rights that we deserve, is to do that together. It is. That's how we win.
And I think that what will be a tactic of the right-wing elements of the press and this right-wing government is to say to people, you see that person that you clapped on a Thursday night, that's a different person to the person marching down the street with a banner saying we need a pay rise. And you see that person that served you their McDonald's and you were like grateful to get that food, like that's a different person that's or not even hearing the story of like so many sofa surfers that work for fast food chains because they can't afford their own properties or can't pay their own bills. That in the movement, we make that connection, we connect the dots, and we say it's the same people, we are part of the same working class. And if you imagine Jesse's words, Brian's words, Melissa's words, with the People's Assemblies, activists, in solidarity with all of those different industrial campaigns, the pressure that we can build against this government and against this system actually is huge. And everybody who thinks another world is possible and austerity doesn't have to be a political necessity is welcome. If you're an anti-racist, if you are aspiring for better things for your own life and your own communities, you are welcome. I'm going to ask you just to do this. I know it's hard, but imagine that, because we only have a couple of minutes left, imagine that you have got somebody who's not really, I don't know how they would be, but not really convinced right now about your take on things, about why they need to be in a union, or why you think there has to be change, and that it doesn't have to be like this. Just give me a minute of your thoughts as if you were convincing them. Brian, is it all right to come to you first again, please? Sorry to put you in it, but
No
just go for
pressure.
it. No pressure. Go, Brian. You're convincing the world.
Society is so obscenely unequal. Take, what Black Lives Matter has drawn attention to over the last 2 or 3 weeks, and I personally have been massively inspired by seeing young people taking direct action. They're doing that because they look at the society that we have just now, whether it be the institutional racism, the unbelievable economic inequality that we have in this society, where someone like Melissa, who literally makes the wealth of these corporations, it simultaneously is being told that they don't have the right to be able to pay, to be paid enough to be able to pay their telephone bill, let alone luxuries like your headphones, being able to literally live, right? While these corporations take millions of pounds. The Intercontinental Hotel Group, as I said earlier, the chief exec has taken £3.7 million in a wage, just as wage, right? And they're sacking thousands of workers. If you're in that position and you think that is fair, then we're not the movement for you. If you look at that and think that needs changed, then you need to get together with your colleagues and say enough is enough, and we demand better.
Jesse, thanks, Brian. Jesse?
I would say for people to look back at historically and think of all of the things that happened, of all the evolutionary change, not evolutionary, of all the changes that happened, women getting the vote, slavery ending, people getting paid a decent wage, all of these massive things that happened in the past and are continuing to happen now all came from unions, and they all came from people coming together, signing petitions, going out when it was safe to do so, going out and protesting, and coming together to be a united voice. If we all stand for the same thing and shout loud enough, we will be heard. It doesn't mean that you then have to go out on the streets and cause riots and protests and cause all sorts of chaos. It means you come together, you form your ideas with other people who are like-minded and experiencing the same issues and are fighting the same fight as you, and you get your voice heard collectively and as one. And when you're loud enough, they can't say they didn't hear you.
And the last words are with you, Melissa.
Like I said before, we either stay in the situation that we're in right now and we do nothing, or we get up and we change it. We get up and we stand to get together. If I went to my boss's house and knocked on his door and I said, I need a pay rise, I'm struggling here, he'd probably send the dogs out and, run me off his property. But if you all came with me, and then the whole of McDonald's workers and KFC, Burger King, if you all came with me and we all knocked on his door, he wouldn't be able to say anything. He wouldn't be able to say no. Definitely, he'd have to give them what they want right now. Please get them off my lawn. That's something that my organizers always said to me, and I think is so very relevant. One more thing I wanted to say as well is that these big rich corporations, the way they work in unity. They are united. They are a union, right? They are working together. They are together. They stick together. They stay together. And that's how they get their money. We need to do the same thing. We need to stick together, stay together, say the same thing together. That's the way we get change, getting together.
Absolutely right. There's a ruthlessness about their class, Melissa, isn't there? And we need a ruthlessness in defense of our class too. I honestly, and I hope this doesn't sound patronizing, but I've been really inspired by your 3 contributions tonight. Just feel so I always feel warm knowing we're not actually alone. We're all actually in different corners of the United Kingdom and feeling the same. People will be watching this. Many people struggling with their mental health, struggling with very practical, like to pay bills, to understand what the future holds. And actually, It's us who are relevant. It's the movement that is relevant. We can literally change the course of history. A comment from somebody called Bill said organisation is absolutely everything in the coming period in the face of what might be positioned as an inevitability of mass redundancies. Doesn't have to be like that. Austerity doesn't have to be like that. Workers paying for this crisis doesn't have to be like that. And we will make sure in our unity that it will not be that way. Thanks so much. Let me just say two things. You've got nothing else to do, nothing better to do anyway tomorrow night than come to the People's Assembly Big Night In, where we're going to have some brilliant comedians. I'll just reassure you again, I'm not bringing the jokes. Other people, amazing artists and performers are bringing maybe like a bit of light relief amidst all of this seriousness and intensity. And secondly, so a week today, 7 p.m, we have, because it's the National Health Service birthday, we have a National Health Service special, because we know what's going to happen. We know those in power are going to try and occupy the celebrations of the National Health Service and pretend to be all in gratitude and stuff like that, whilst, as Jessie eloquently explained, keeping people in debt for wanting to be nurses, not giving people a pay rise. So let's bring some politics to the birthday of the National Health Service whilst also being in gratitude. But for now, let me just say a huge thank you again to Jessie, Brian and Melissa. Just share this before we end because they can still see it.